So, Mr. Speaker, what is this debate ultimately about? We think this debate is about 100,000 patients that are on the waiting list in order to get organ transplant. We think this debate is about 4,000 patients that die each year waiting for the organs that will never actually come to them. We think this policy should be basically about what is the best way to save these people as much as we can, and how quickly can we actually save them. We think for the government, their responsibility is to save patients when they have the means to save them. We think government should help people to make choices that are beneficial for their health and beneficial for their lives. We think the current system of illegalizing everything basically lets these patients to suffer and to die. So the model that we are going to propose in today's debate is very, very simple. If you look into the countries like Iran, where they allow the adequate compensation for the organs that they give to the patients, they actually have no waiting list. Why? Because patients can always purchase organs at an affordable price whenever they want to. So there is no need to actually wait for the organs and, simply die. So what are we going to do? All you're going to do is basically very, very simple. We think we're going to allow government to act as a brokerage that whoever needs organs can simply register with their blood samples like antigen types and whatnot. And whoever wants to sell organs can also register through the government. So your government is going to act as a broker to help find a proper match for both of the sellers and the buyers. We think when both parties basically agree to buy and sell organs, then the hospitals can facilitate all the procedures and the surgical measures that are adequate to help these both parties. We think this is not basically exclusive to the current system we have, which is encouraging organ donation. We think in nature organ donation and this organ sales is to save the people. So we think it's not mutually exclusive and we can do both in order to save more lives. So what am I going to talk to you in today's speech, Mr. Speaker? I'm going to talk to you about the two things. First of all, why is it the role of government to respect my bodily autonomy? And second of all, what are the practical benefits that we would like to bring out through this policy? So first of all, Mr. Speaker, why is it the role of government to respect bodily autonomy? Two levels of analysis. First level is why is my bodily autonomy therefore so important that government needs to respect it? We think everybody has a bodily autonomy to take care of myself and to improve the quality of my life. As long as I don't harm other individual in the process of doing so, I have a right to buy an organ because that is purely for the purpose of improving my health. That is purely for the purpose of pursuing my right to happiness. Therefore, I can improve the overall well-being of my life. Then second level of analysis, Mr. Speaker, why should government actually respect my right to bodily autonomy? We think role of government is not to restrict my bodily autonomy, but to facilitate me to make the best and the most informed choices possible. We think in the status quo, when it's simply illegal, it actually discourages this. Why? Because people don't have right information and an adequate amount of information to actually make a right choice. We think when the government provides no regulation and no safety measures, it actually puts patients into more danger because now they're more open to exploitation and now they're more open to abuses and whatnot. So let me move on to my second point, which is practical benefit we'd like to encourage and we'd like to bring to our society. Before I move on, yes, sir.
Madam, if your justification is that you want to help out these patients, are you willing to agree to any alternative measures that provide...
Okay, I'm going to touch upon those alternatives in my second point, which is about practical benefit to everyone. 2 points of analysis, Mr. Speaker. First of all, how it's actually going to bring benefits to the patients. We think both sides ultimately agree that there's this great need for the organs and they cannot be overemphasized. We think right now there aren't enough organs to actually go around to these patients who are just simply waiting on the waiting list. Why? Because we think that's ultimately because other policies and other mechanisms and other alternatives that the opposition will bring later on simply don't work. Why? We have three main alternatives. Firstly, we can encourage donation, and that's what we're doing in the status quo, and it can never encourage enough organs to be actually on the people and actually be distributed to people. Second alternative that we might have is a mandate organ donation after death. And we also agree that this can be a good alternative, but the problem is that we never get enough organs, we never get enough good organs that are in good condition to actually go around to all the patients. The third alternative that they might bring, Mr. Speaker, is about how we can develop technology and help these people. But we think it's simply too far away to develop technology, and it's simply going to be too expensive for all the patients to afford, technologically developed organs and etc. So we think there's a need to find a direct and immediate solution to these patients, and our policy does exactly that. The second analysis, Mr. Speaker, is about how we can bring benefit to the sellers and those who are actually poor. In the status quo, Mr. Speaker, we think in the status quo is more dangerous for both sides because these people are less informed and they're more open for exploitation by brokers. We think in the status quo, it's the brokers that only benefit. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? We think for the buyers, they're desperate in need of the organs. Therefore, even if they don't think it's something fishy, they still have to go on with it anyway. Second of all, for the sellers who are really poor, we think they're usually in a situation where they suddenly need a lot of money. Therefore, they're vulnerable to whatever brokers tell them, and they're more tempted to go into hospital and they sell their kidney, even if they don't get adequate compensations and whatnot. We think brokers are the only one that get a lot of money, and poor people don't really get compensated and don't properly get informed about what kind of procedures that they're going to go through. We think when we legalize the framework, and we think when the government takes this role of brokering everything, we think it actually ensures transparency. It ensures that things are done in a safe way, things are done in a transparent way, that the transaction actually happens to compensate and adequately transact the money to these sellers who are selling their organs. We think government role is to facilitate arrangements for successful transaction and to improve transparency, therefore save both patients and the sellers who are very vulnerable in the status quo. So Mr. Speaker, what did I prove to you today? I told you why there's a great need for this society to save these patients who are simply suffering and simply dying. I told you why this is the best solution, even considering all the possible alternatives that we have in the status quo. Third of all, we told you why bodily autonomy should be respected and why it's a responsibility of the government to promote and protect this bodily autonomy. Therefore, I'm proud to propose.
I think I'm gonna go over time. If I slip anything, you pick it up, okay?
Here. My argument.
Mr. Speaker, we think side proposition's arguments were very naive in this debate because organs are lacking. Absolutely agree. Like, government has an obligation to save people's lives. Like, absolutely agree. Do you honestly expect us to go against those things? Like, the problem that we have with proposition model is that their their incentive or the kind of compensation they provide should be based upon corporate logic, it should be based upon monetary incentive. And moreover, she wasted 2 minutes of her second argument, like rebutting to this non-existent alternative that we're not going to propose anyways, right? So she kind of set up this 3 alternatives that she thought we're going to propose and rebutted to that, which we thought was complete waste of time. Because what we're going to propose on side opposition is this alternative plan that is imposed in several jurisdictions, including Singapore, of tit-for-tat policy, Mr. Speaker. So, which I'm going to step through right now. First, you're eligible for organ donation and organ recipient as an organ recipient only when you or your family has experience of donating organ yourself, and this should not be based upon economic transaction. We think the plan is already being done in the status quo when government, when they see someone designate a specific person to donate their organ to, government already verifies whether or not economic transaction is there. So only when yourself or your family members have donated, has a previous experience of donating organ, will you be eligible for your organ donation. But secondly, if there are 2 candidate recipients who meet this qualification, we're then going to use prioritization criteria, for example, regarding medical urgency, organ compatibility, or how long have you been in the system, or when have you donated, or what type of organ you have donated, and whatnot. We think this tit-for-tat policy is much, much better compared to this organ selling and organ economic transaction, which I'm going to explain how our policy is better. We think our plan is mutually exclusive because we do not involve corporate logic and monetary incentives, whereas we solve all the problems that they mentioned about black market or things like how there are lack of organ donation and whatnot. I'm going to talk about 2 things in my substantive today. First, I'm going to directly compare the model and tell you why their model is horrible for the status quo. Second, I'm going to talk about why this legalization of organ selling leads to exploitation of poor and leads to double victimization of poor in the status quo. So the first argument, direct model comparison. There are basically three reasons why our model is much superior than their organ selling model. The first reason is because money and monetary values is something that is unfairly distributed among people, whereas organ, everyone has their body and everyone has their organ. So if you need an organ, you can simply donate your organ, in return for getting another organ, whereas if you don't have money because you're not much well off and rich, you cannot buy new organ. You cannot get the desperate organ that you need under their paradigm. We think this reciprocal network that we create regarding how you provide health benefit and save other people, in return be saved by other people in terms of your health benefit, is much better because money is unfairly distributed among social members. The second reason why our plan is much better is because it's more legitimate trade-off. What do we mean by this? According to how much money you already have, the degree of money, although the absolute amount might be same, the perceived level of benefit is absolutely different. Because, for example, if there's $10,000, if I'm Bill Gates, $10,000 is nothing. But if I'm me, $10,000 is absolutely necessary for my survival, which means, Mr. Speaker, that for Bill Gates, he doesn't have any incentive to give money, and the perceived benefit of that organ selling is not big for rich people. Which means that our plan is better because the perceived benefit of getting a new organ in return for giving another organ is based on health problems and health instances, and the stage is the same for all the individuals, and that's why our plan of giving an organ in return for getting an organ is much legitimate trade-off in the status quo. No thank you, sir. But the third and final reason is because how their plan distorts the prioritization process of organ recipients. Why? Because we take into consideration various concepts like medical urgency, like organ transplant, the organ compatibility and whatnot. And we think medical urgency is a super important concept when you prioritize organ recipients, because if there's one person who's gonna die within 2 days if you don't get organ donation at the moment, if there's another person who is much richer but who's not gonna die for another year even if he does not get organ donation at the moment, their plan prioritizes people with less urgent circumstances, and that is a distorted prioritization and destruction of government obligation that she wants to talk about. I'm going to take your POI now.
Sure. Even in the status quo, we take into the consideration of medical urgency of this patient. So if I'm on the verge of death, then I'm on top of the list.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'll tell you in my second argument as to how they exploit the poor, because now with their plan, poor people will have much less likeliness of being prioritizing getting the organ, because you decrease the number of people who altruistically donate organ, obviously because of this monetary incentive. That's something that I'm going to talk about in my second argument, which nicely leads on to my second argument. Firstly, we would say that bodily autonomy argument doesn't stand. Why? Because you will not honestly sell your kidney for this new fancy iPad. You will sell your kidney when you're desperately needing that money, when your rationality and bodily autonomy is clouded by this desperate, miserable circumstances that you're failing. We don't call this bodily autonomy, we call this structural violence. Because we say that government is neglecting their obligation, because it was government's obligation to provide people with social welfare, provide people with job opportunities, provide people with education. Choice without given, without any other alternative. Choice with only one option is not choice, guys. So you don't save the sellers. You force these sellers to sell their organ, making them as a scapegoat for that the government can conveniently escape from their root responsibility to solve the root cause of the problem, which was the poverty itself. We don't think this is bodily autonomy. We think this is systematically coerced, and these people become victims of circumstances. More problematically, this is double victimization, because if you can now sell your organ and get monetary compensation in return, the amount of people who would want to donate their organ altruistically will obviously decrease to a large amount, which means that even if you make those medically urgent patients on the top of the list, it is less likely that they get the organ without providing any form of money to the sellers, which means that poor people not only can get organ, but also they are forced to sell organ, which becomes a double victimization of poor people. I told you that this plan is horrible compared to our plan, which is a lot better and fancy and fantastic, which is why we're happy to oppose.
Yeah.
English 2. 지금 4시에 English 2로 가.
Why?
야채도 있어요. 야채, 과일.
This is mediocre.
That's the diet side.
Newlywed!
We'll get some of those medical lexicon forms changed. Okay, so what's interesting with the opposition's approach is that they concede that no one altruistically donates organs.
Yeah.
So this is a debate about a comparison of incentives. They want to impose this incentive of you can only donate if you or your family member, or receive rather, if you or your family member has donated before. And that seems pretty harsh, not even that if you have signed up or is willing to donate, but you must have already donated before, which has numerous problems which I get to. Versus on our side, doing what society has accepted works, a free market, open trading model that actually exists in the status quo, and what we are calling for is to regulate it. So we're not trying to introduce something that no one's doing. In the reality, in the status quo is people are doing this, as my first speaker established. The question is it better for us, the government, to acknowledge that it happens and to regulate it? Does that lead to a better situation? Versus it doesn't. For them to come out, and they never gave us any other way of regulating this or eradicating this. So the only way, all the harms from the black market and stuff that my first speaker presented to you removes, is if their amazing tit-for-tat model removes the need of any organ whatsoever. No, thank you, sir, from the status quo, right? So what I'm going to do is firstly address this tit-for-tat model and then talk about how it impacts the poor. And this was also the second part of his contribution, which was, it was not going to help the poor in the sense of how it impacts a priority model for organs, and then discriminates against them in terms of body autonomy and so on and so forth. Okay? Firstly though, no thank you, sir. The tit-for-tat policy is that if you only get that, if you only donate, then you get it. We think, firstly, number one, this does not create any net increase of organs. Unless they're assuming that people who are worried about donating, receiving an organ in the future, donate one now before you end up getting an organ. And we think that's incredibly optimistic. People who are healthy don't even think about getting insurance, let alone are they going to donate an organ, right? Number one. Number two, you're going to make people harm their health in some way in order for them to save themselves in the future. And we think that's a little bit ironic. So I have to give up a kidney because sometimes in the future I may need a liver, or I may need an eye or a heart, and so I have to live without a kidney without knowing whether I'll get one or not. That's pretty ridiculous. But most importantly, it discriminates against the people you're trying to help. If I have a hereditary kidney problem in my family, how am I going to donate my kidney in order to actually get a kidney, right? If I'm kind of compared more sickly than other people, then I am biased against ever receiving an organ in any situation. So you don't actually help the people you really, really need to help. And we don't understand on any level how this tit-for-tat policy can work. But maybe you can tell me.
It's unrealistic that you say that all of your family members has exactly the same problem in your organ. But moreover, that system is being implemented right now with blood donation. If you donate your blood, you get priority when you need blood transfusion.
It's a difference between saying you get a priority on the list versus saying that's the only way that you will ever get an organ.
Shame.
There's no shame. What shame is your approach. That's what's shameful. Because if you give more to the system, you can give it back. If you are healthier, you can get a priority over receiving that organ. If you're more likely to fit in receiving that organ, then you can get priority in receiving that organ. All of those things are perfectly acceptable. But you're not showing how that increases the number of organs that exist in the status quo, and you're not showing how that helps the people who absolutely needs the organ, and that's the problem, right? So secondly, talking about the status quo, when he talks about the priority model, whether or not people will still get these things, they concede that not more people are going to donate. They didn't present any other way to increase more organs within the status quo, right? But we think some people will still give organs when they die. That's the only other source. The only source of organs is when people die, they have an organ donor card and they give their organs, or you donate to a family member. So there will still be some free organs in the status quo. To these free floating organs in the status quo, everything else still applies. You still have priority models, you still have best fit models, you have first come first serve models. All of those things determine how these very few organs in the status quo are distributed among the people who can't get organs from a family member. Because if I want to donate to my sister, I don't go within a priority model because I'm only going to give it to my sister, right? Unless they want to radically change that too. So under that model, the poor can still get organs. And we'll tell you how it's even more likely that they will. Because firstly, there will be a new injection of organs from those who want to trade them. So if I am super rich, I'm not going to put myself on the waiting list, right? I will say, I'm willing to pay $5 million or whatever it is for a kidney, and he's right, only Bill Gates will be able to do that. But that's great. For me, who has a healthy kidney, and for $5 million, I have to work for, I don't know, 50 years or something to get $5 million, but I can give up my kidney and get $5 million. We think that is an amazing choice that any individual should be allowed to make, right? And I'm going to expand on that on two levels here on the quote. So firstly, in the free market model, your body is a commodity. Countries legalize things like prostitution, where you take incredible amounts of risk and use your body in order to improve your life and your situation, right? So firstly, we say that people are capable of making these informed choices. The standard of danger is sufficiently and similar. He said there's no such thing as bodily autonomy. There is. People face these pressures all the time. I don't choose to become a prostitute after I get my law degree from Yale. I choose to become a prostitute because that's the most available choice to me. I don't choose to become a coal miner because of all the other options, but that's the way the life cycle works out. Now, you ask yourself whether you're helping these people or harming them by doing these things, right? We say that you have to acknowledge, you can't be patronizing and say you're too poor and too stupid, therefore, to make this decision for yourself. We say on that second level, it's able for people to make these strategic trade-offs. If I choose to spend 8 years in construction work in Qatar so that I can feed my family and give them a better life, that is a strategic choice that I am capable to make. And that choice is good for me, that choice is good for my family. In fact, this is going to be less likely to harm me to donate a kidney than the other choices that I'm going to make, like working offshore in an oil rig, right, where I could possibly die. Okay? So in that sense, it recognizes something that we as society already recognize, that people make these sort of strategic trade-offs. Okay? So on government, we're very proud then to propose, because we think this helps people who are sick and helps people in the status quo who are already participating in organ trading.
That I'm going to deal with before I actually move on to our last argument in terms of why we see it problematic, the entire stance of side government that supports minimum government role and maximum individual choice, especially when the debate should consider what practically happens in reality, how poverty affects individuals' choices, and what roles government should play in a society where there are situations where individuals inevitably make bad choices, right? So let's move on to questions first. Firstly, there was the issue of whether this alternative is going to work or not, right? But you have to bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, that debate is always about comparison, right? So Logan did a wonderful job in terms of telling us this minor stakeholders in our model where there might be minor difficulties in a very, very rare situation where the entire extended family has the exact same problems in the exact same organ, right? Number one, we already told you, Mr. Speaker, that's very highly unlikely, right? But we can also apply different sets of models in terms of allowing these people to donate other forms of health, right? That I don't know, mandate these people to make blood transfusions a lot more than others, right? Some kind of additional policy that can address to these very, very, very minor group of people. But secondly, more importantly, even if we were to concede that, Mr. Speaker, that our model is not picture perfect to every single person in our society, we have to compare what kind of stakeholders that their model discriminates and what kind of stakeholders that our model discriminates. We tell you, Mr. Speaker, socially, structurally speaking, the type of poor people that they're systematically disallowing from accessing such type of health, the poor people who they systematically target in terms of dispensaries for organs, in terms of more richer people in the society, are much, much larger harm in comparison to very minor health problems that our model might suggest. That is why we're perfectly fine in terms of conceding that, okay, even if our model may discriminate certain type of individuals, we're happy to concede that that harm is much smaller than the harms that's going to occur under their model. Let's secondly then move on to the issue of whether this alternative is justified. We think my partners POI kind of did that job, right? We already see in the case where blood transfusions, in case of other health help that government provides, we already provide a model of tit for tat. Why is that comparatively better? Because we tell you that ability for you to give out your health give out, like contribute to society in terms of health is much more fair compared to your ability to financially contribute to society, or your ability to financially directly reach out another person and pay that person. That we tell you that that type of ability is much more unfairly distributed in comparison to the type of incentive that we see in individuals when we apply our model. That's why we think, in comparison of justification, our model is like much more superior. Let's secondly move on to the issue of black market, right? Because Logan told us, like, look, reality is black market already exists. That's why to mitigate these harms, we have to actually apply their model, right? We tell you, number one, black market exists because of lack of organs, right? We solve that problem. That's why we tell you that combined with like other legal alternatives to actually suppress black markets, we tell you an improved status under our model. But before I move on, disprove this.
So why is it more acceptable for me to work 10 years in a coal mine than for me to sell my kidney and get more in return?
Okay, so I'm gonna deal with that like in a few minutes, so sit tight and listen, right? But secondly, more importantly, we tell you, like, black market, actually what you're doing is you're moving black market to the more like overground, like legitimate field, right? So the harm of black market is that the guy who can pay more gets to control everything. We tell you, when the stake here is health, that same harm already exactly samely applies in the situation of like their model as well, right? That's why we don't necessarily think harm of black market disappears even under your model, right? But thirdly, more importantly, regarding the issue of poverty, right? Logan told us, like, look, these people have a legitimate choice to earn lump sum of money in exchange of like their organs, right? Number one, Mr. Speaker, we tell you, you always have to consider that context when it comes to choices, right? So you do not make a choice out of a vacuum. You always make a choice when there's context behind that choice, when there are social like triggers, social encouragements for you to actually make it more comfortable for you to make that certain choices, right? So when we particularly think it's especially more harmful is because of that. Why? Because you allow these poor to like voluntarily opt into the service of the rich in exchange of their actual health, right? Especially it's problematic when we talk about the procedures that organ donation like requires, like very invasive and dangerous surgeries that could possibly risk your life, right? We tell you, especially in that case, you have to consider that choice is not always made in your head, but it's socially constructed as well. And because of the socially constructed reason of poverty, government is justified to actually protect these individuals from making that choice, right? But furthermore, we tell you, like, lump sum of money doesn't do anything for these people. Why? Because poor are usually poor because of structural reasons, right? Lack of education. You don't know how to use that lump sum of money, and a lot of these poor people also suffer from other types of social problems like drug addiction, right? So when you actually throw these lumps of money to these people, what they're gonna do is, like, they're gonna waste that money and never actually make it as a like ground for the seed for these people to actually be successful, right? Let's very quickly move on to my last argument, because my last argument is really awesome, right? We tell you, like, the reason why their support of extremely small government is dangerous, Mr. Speaker, is because number one, we think it justifies the government foregoing its responsibility and shamelessly pushes the burden of helping themselves to these individuals. It pushes the burden to individuals to access the treatment rather than it becoming the government's responsibility. Because like the PM said, it's a very dangerous rhetoric. We allowed any facilitation that you might want. Therefore, if you don't have the ability to get the organs, do that, right? That is why we tell you, my partner's argument regarding like health and regarding priority becomes specifically important because we think that's precisely the government's role to provide certain things that's more priority for the society, or the direction the society should aspire to, rather than what the society is, which is the dictatorship of the market economy, right? We tell you ultimately that is why we think in comparison to societies, our society of a bigger government that regulates and provides better things to the people are in fact more aspirable, and that's why we're supremely proud to pose.